if there's a relationship and there's a genuine feeling to help each other out, which there should be on that team, that's the teams that have won Super Bowls. If you go back in history, you look at the Joe Montanas and everything else, you look at those teams had a synergy and trust amongst each other like none other.
Okay, so I got to ask Dean, right? Because, as companies are growing, even like my company is growing, right? It's like the difference between like strategic alliances versus, employees versus, independent contractors and just the whole idea of equity and ownership and profit share. Like, I mean, it seems like it's tough. And sometimes it's like you're throwing darts. Like, am I bringing on the full-time person? Am I doing them part-time? Is it going to be independent contractor? Is it the fractional CFO? Is it so walk us through, when you're saying starters, are you saying like, these are the people that I'm trying to recruit to my team, or just?
No, these are people you already have on your team. So it doesn't mean they're not going to be replaced. You're not going to swap out draft picks, right? What happens when your quarterback's not, what happened to you guys when your quarterback wasn't producing, right? All of a sudden, Purdy went from not the bench, he went to a starter, right? So think about that. So it's the same thing. It doesn't mean that team that you have down is who you're starting. You're just starting with that. And then you're going to play with it. You're going to say, if it can't help you get to the Super Bowl and you have this dotted line of what it's going to take, and maybe that team helps you build the plan and the dotted line to go from startup to growth stage to IPO, right? So maybe one of those team members has to have that previous experience, and you have a relationship where they're willing to guide you and help you. And maybe there's professional fees involved. You have to decide your budget and what that looks like. But I've built many companies without that. I've offered equity to people. I've offered to include them when we do raise capital, that they can be hired or they can be part of that team. But sometimes if there's a relationship and there's a genuine feeling to help each other out, which there should be on that team, that's the teams that have won Super Bowls. If you go back in history, you look at the Joe Montanas and everything else, you look at those teams had a synergy and trust amongst each other like none other. And those are the teams that actually win, not the ones with the most talent, right? We've seen this. The ones with the most talent don't always win. What happened to the Buffalo Bills last year, So you start to see that and you're like, wow, it isn't all about that. We have to put our egos aside, really be all in together, row in the same direction to arrive at that championship.
And so, by the way, I watched an interview with Tom Brady yesterday where he was being interviewed, and he talked about part of his leadership. I don't know if you saw this one yet. And he talked about the single best way he defines leadership and the ability. And the person said, "Look, you're so high achieving, you weren't easy on your teammates, but they all loved you. What was it?" And he goes, "I generally cared for them, right? And I met them where they were at." And he goes, we like you were saying, it was the care, and then it was the consistency, right? But it was personal one-on-one that he would that's just who he was. He just generally cared for the people, and no matter where they were at, where they were from, whatever, he had ability. And he also would say there were times when people were so talented that he'd be a team member with, and he'd say, "You know what? And the person's not buying into the like say the Patriots way, for example." And he goes, I still love you. Like, you're amazing. I cannot wait to compete against you, right? Like, I cannot wait to compete against you, but I love you. And I get where you're coming from. You're really amazing about whatever the thing that they were being, let's say, a little more selfish about. And so he said, it's genuinely still caring for the person and then having the high standard.